I wonder what Nietzsche or Socrates would think about neuro-linguistic programming. I wonder if they would agree with it. So is neuro-linguistic programming a philosophy, or does it have a philosophical aspect to it? The short answer to this is no, it does not, but there's a very good reason for this. Now, before I get into that, if you find yourself liking this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you want more videos like this, make sure you click that subscribe button and hit the bell so you'll be notified when I put new videos out. And if you're a bit impatient and you would like to know what it is that I'm giving away for free in this video, if you check the description, you will see a link down there. More on that later. Philosophy and NLP are closely related because they both tackle this idea of how do we improve on something. Philosophy is more in the theoretical study of knowledge and what I would call content. So it is the content of, what makes life better for people. It's what is it that all human beings need? Like, once we have food and shelter and clothing, then what is it that fulfills a person? What is it that we need? Anytime we ask why questions, we're inviting content. And usually in NLP, we want to stay away from why questions. So for example, if you're in a sales situation and somebody says no to whatever it is that you're selling and you say why, well, what you just did was you invited them to create reasons why they're saying no. And so it only makes their objection more solidified, so they're really not going to say yes if you're sort of helping them cultivate that argument, even if it's because they're defending it. So when we give reasons for something, when we give history behind something, well, I do things this way because when I was a kid, blah, 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 blah. That's usually where philosophy resides most often, and not 100%. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the overlap with NLP. But in general, philosophy deals more with the why. And that's really important. I'm not in any way knocking it. I love philosophy. The problem that I've had with philosophy is I used to study philosophy on my own when I was in high school and beyond that, because I just really enjoyed it. But I did get to a point where it just wasn't, it wasn't doing it because I was getting a lot of good whys, but I didn't really know how. Now, some people are really good with this. Some people can hear a good why, and then the how just sort of comes together for them. They sort of figured out. I've never been that way. Maybe it's because I had an older brother. I expected to always be shown a way or taught a way how to do something. The why was rarely good enough for me. I mean, the why is very motivating. Even Nietzsche said that any why, a good enough why, will take care of any how. There's a lot of truth to that, but I struggled with this. Maybe I had a form of dyslexia in this regard, that I just kind of go, okay, well, what step do I take next? And that's where NLP came into my life. And I think this is what is very powerful about NLP. It's more about the how. We teach NLP in a way that we try to leave as much content out of it. We leave the why up to the individual. If a person wants a certain kind of success, my job is not to tell them the kind of success that they should have or should want. My job is to help them get it, but also to look beyond just the success and what is it they're ultimately trying to do. So in NLP, we approach experience, which is what we all want. We want good experiences. We want fulfilling life experiences. And then look at the structure of how do we create experience to begin with. The good ones and the bad ones. And then if we can understand enough about how we structure experiences that give us the kinds of experiences that fulfill us, that make us happy, that are not just good for ourselves, but good for the people around us, then using that structure, we basically replicate the structure of positive experiences that are fulfilling in as many areas of our life as possible. And that is a contentless way of going about that. It's like a model. It's a structure. We want to leave content out as much as possible when we use NLP. And the reason for this is that we can move a lot faster when we use straight structure and without the content. We can get lost in content for a long time. So the difference would be like if I'm working with a client and everything that everything's guided by what the client wants. How do we move the client toward what it is that they want so that they can experience the greatest fulfillment? And that might be achieving goals, but it could be a lot of other things. If that client constantly starts going back into content, which is like telling me all the stories about how they decided on what it is that they want and what works for them and what doesn't work for them because of all these things that have happened to them or didn't happen to them, this could go on for hours and hours, if not days and weeks and months. I want to skip past that. I want to know, well, how is it they're creating that experience? Like, what do they see? What did they hear internally that is creating the experience the way that it's being created? The more that I can understand this for someone, the more I can help them structure their experiences to become the experiences that they want to have, the ones that are going to fulfill them. So we're talking about structure primarily with neuro-linguistic programming versus content, which has a lot more to do with the why, and that's more philosophy. So neuro-linguistic programming is not a philosophy, it's a technology. Philosophy is, like I said, more about the why, like what really fulfills human beings, what is good for the world. And that's all really important. And if you spend enough time in philosophy, you can't not get some of the how, though. The philosophy will do some of the how. I've just found that it doesn't do it as well as neuro-linguistic programming. And what neuro-linguistic programming does, it's a lot of the how, but doesn't tell you a whole lot of why. And it doesn't tell you necessarily how we should behave or how humans should be. But there is some overlap here. So with neuro-linguistic programming, we have something called presuppositions. And the presuppositions are a list of exactly that, presuppositions. Some people say, well, they're just beliefs. They're not really beliefs. We hold these things more loosely. It's sort of like a filter that you apply onto experience. And so, for example, I'll give you a few presuppositions. There is no such thing as failure-only feedback. So you apply that way of thinking toward what we would normally consider failure. It takes the personalization out of it. And you just say, okay, well, that's just feedback. Now, you could argue that that is something that is philosophical, and I wouldn't say that it's not. But the purpose of it in NLP is just to say, okay, well, that's how you're framing the experience. You're framing the experience one way, and it's not going to give you what you want. You reframe that experience, and then now you can move ahead, and now you can do something. Another presupposition is that the most flexible and adaptable element of any system is going to be the one with the most control. This is fascinating, when you think about that. And so is that philosophy? You could certainly get philosophical about that. You could certainly make the argument that's philosophy. But again, it's not the approach of NLP. The approach of NLP is, well, how do I get from point A to point B? And we're not adding content to it. So it's from point A to point B. Well, if I'm more flexible and more adaptable, I'm more likely to get what it is that I want because I'm not held back by obstacles. I find a way around it. I find a way to adapt to it. So there inevitably is plenty of overlap between NLP and philosophy. And one more thing about that is NLP was created on the basis of excellence and succeeding at whatever that is. That in itself sort of tilts it to having a philosophy. NLP was not created to that so coldly and so structurally and so much about technology that it was, it could go to the dark side or it could go to areas of just achieving with not the consideration of, how that might hurt or other people or hurt systems. When it was first created, it was created based on modeling therapists. So the therapists were always trying to move things in a better direction for their clients, always trying to have success and fulfillment. But that did not stop people from taking NLP and doing not so great things with it when it comes to manipulation and seduction. NLP has been used for all those things. So technologically speaking, you can take that technology, and because the technology itself does not necessarily imply a philosophical stance, you can use it for ill or for bad. Just like maybe like a weapon, or a car. A car is not meant to kill people, but you can kill people with it. So you can use it for bad things. The car itself is indifferent to that. But NLP, when it was first created, did have an implication there that it is toward success, toward happiness, toward achieving, toward excellence. So NLP also could not escape its own philosophical foundation. So if NLP doesn't have a philosophy, is it useful to combine NLP with a philosophy? And I would say not only yes, but people naturally do anyway. There are people from all walks of life who practice NLP. Zen Buddhists practice NLP. Many Christians of many different denominations practice NLP. And the reason why it can fit into any of these philosophies and any of these religions is because NLP is a technology model. It is a content-free model, so it can really pop into anything and assume those other presuppositions from other philosophies and other religions. Now, I have found that there are two in particular that work really well with NLP, and that is non-duality and Stoicism. Non-duality is at the heart of all Zen and even Hinduism and most of your Eastern religions. It's this idea that there is no separation between self and anything else, that in your experience, in your neurology, whatever you want to call it, in your awareness, all things that are within your awareness, you are not separate from. This is very helpful, especially doing self-concept work. The self-concept model created by Steve Andreas, he did not create this model to be any part of like an Eastern thought or Eastern religion, but when he was creating it, he realized that he was kind of bumping into those ideas, and it works very well that way, because what you have to do when you work with self-concept is realize that your identity is a subjective experience. It is not a fact. And so if that is true, then we can start to understand the structure of that experience of self. And if we want to improve it, we just make changes to the structure until we get the responses that we want. Non-duality is great because it fits with the theories of NLP, the theories of the self-concept model, that you are not separate from your experiences, that all of it's happening in your neurology. And so you can take things like conflicts with other people. Some of us have conflicts with people who are no longer alive. Like if you had a conflict with your father and your father's no longer living, where are you carrying that? You're carrying that in your neurology. So you can resolve that conflict within yourself without it even having to talk to the other person. So this idea of experience and you're not being separate from your experience fits really well with non-duality. And I found non-duality when I was learning NLP, because I had a background in non-duality, it made learning NLP much easier and much faster. Stoicism is amazing. It pairs amazingly well with NLP. I think Stoicism on its own without NLP is probably the greatest philosophy that we have as far as practicality. And the reason why it works so well with NLP is because it's extremely practical, because Stoicism is really rooted in rationality and virtue. So you're always accepting things as they are, accepting experiences as they are, accepting your feelings as they are, and then saying, okay, well, from here, how do I improve this? How do I make this better? But never moving away from what's actually happening, always accepting it. And in NLP, in order for us to really work on ourselves and use NLP, we have to have that sort of acceptance, that sort of radical acceptance of how it is that we're feeling, because without that, or acknowledging a problem, without acknowledging the problem, we can't go and fix it. So Stoicism pairs very well because of how practical it is. And then, like I mentioned, non-duality goes very well with it. One of the things about non-duality that I struggled with is trying to apply it in life. I had a hard time. Like, I could get the philosophy, it made perfect sense. Yes, it brought me some peace, but I also had this ambition that Zen and non-duality, a lot of your Eastern religions don't deal with that well. Now, I know that you have like Zen of, applied to martial arts, and some of these Eastern philosophies applied to martial arts, but and which is very practical. But in everyday living, I found this very difficult. It goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of this video, where philosophy I found sort of lacked in practical application. And it doesn't invalidate philosophy at all. It's important that we think about these things. But what NLP gave to me was this practical application. And so when you combine NLP with something like non-duality, that just really wakes you up to understanding that you are not separate from your experience, and healing those divides, those conflicts, which oftentimes get projected externally, you start to understand how those are existing. And then with NLP, you can really model that, understand it, and then change that structure. With Stoicism, it's that radical acceptance of how things are. It's realizing, I think the thing that really puts it together is Marcus Aurelius, the only emperor of Rome who was a Stoic, said that when you encounter an obstacle, the obstacle becomes the way. And it is just so powerful. NLP is a lot like that. You don't move away from the experience. You realize the experience is where the answers are, where the keys are. You have to invite that experience. You have to embrace that experience, explore that experience, but primarily not the content, the structure of it. When you combine these philosophies with NLP, in my experience, it has been such a rewarding way to go about this, a rewarding way to go about life. Now, I don't want to exclude any philosophies here. I'm only giving you what has really worked for me. So I would say give those a try and see where that takes you. When we think about practical application, and we think more in terms of technique and technology, we're looking at what basically works. And then when you take that philosophy behind it, the why, well, why should we do things a certain way, then it really makes it very powerful. And so the elements of a healthy self-concept does both. It's like, well, this works well. When you have an identity, a sense of self, and a self-concept that you go about it this way, you're going to get the most fulfillment. You're going to make the most meaning of your life. And that's where the philosophical aspect comes in. So I find this list really just brings these two concepts together very, very well. So if you'd like a copy of that, if you go down to the description right here down below, you'll see a link. Just click that link and you'll get a free PDF on the elements of a healthy self-concept by Steve Andreas. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell so you'll be notified when I put new videos out, which is every Wednesday and every Saturday. And last but not least, if you can think of a friend or a family member who would really benefit from this video, make sure you share it with them. Take care.